Good evening from New York. I'm Chris Hayes. Well, we all learned about the three branches of government in civics class, about the two chambers of Congress, the House and the Senate, and the general constitutional structure of our government. How hard it is to get hundreds of elected representatives of all stripes to agree on big legislation. What we did not learn about is the Elon Musk branch of the government. The world's richest dude, Elon Musk, effectively bought himself control over these United States, apparently. He spent $44 billion to turn Twitter into his personal propaganda outfit and promote Donald Trump. And then he went on to spend $250 million to help get Trump elected. He is now using that authority before Trump is even sworn in to unilaterally determine outcomes for the American people. A guy who's never received a single vote, who is constitutionally ineligible to serve as actual president, who polling shows isn't wanted there by the American people, I guess is now effectively running these United States. So last night, congressional Republicans unveiled a short-term deal, like there have been many others in the years I've been covering Congress, to keep the government funded through March 14th of next year. It was a last-minute decision to avert a government shutdown for the holidays ahead of this weekend's deadline. Republican Speaker Mike Johnson agreed to the deal. Democratic Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer, Dems still have the Senate majority, agreed to the deal. But they apparently forgot to ask Elon Musk. I don't think Musk has any idea what is actually in the bill. In fact, I feel quite certain of that. He urged his followers to use AI to summarize it for him, which, but he still spent the day whipping votes against it to his hundreds of millions of followers on the social media platform he owns. He tweeted more than 70 times against the deal to keep the government open, telling Republicans to kill the bill. And then once it looked like Musk killed the bill, again, this is all Musk, okay? Trump and J.D. Vance, do you remember them? Remember those guys? The guys that ran for office? Well, then they were like, well, they came out against it as well. Oh, I guess the train's leaving the station, issuing a hasty statement on social media and telling reporters that they now want a different way to fund the government.
Would you support a clean CR?
Well, what the president believes is we should support a clean CR so long as it contains a debt limit increase. That's the position of the president, and that's what we're going to try to push for.
Are you supporting a government shutdown then?
Have a good night, guys. Thanks.
Just to be clear, and we'll hit on this a little more, there's never any discussion of the debt ceiling in all of this. They pulled it out of nowhere today because Musk got ahead of him. That's why. Because Musk sees the initiative. Elon Musk, the guy who really runs things. He's not just Trump's co-president. I think that's way too low a title. He's the head dude in charge. And House Republicans certainly know who they are taking their marching orders from.
Elon put out a pretty serious post there, but that's the sentiment of the American people. This is why we won on November 5th.
When sunlight is put on these bills, when now Elon and Vivek can talk about it, when members of Congress, when we look at the bills, the American people don't like what they see.
The American people are paying zero attention to any of this. Zero. Elon put out a pretty serious post. Oh, well, then if Elon put out a serious post. The Republican House Majority Leader, Steve Scalise, confirmed the bill's not dead. It's unclear what comes next, or if there are votes for an alternate bill, as Vance alluded to, which now adds this other new wrinkle, very complex in. But Elon Musk, the guy who's running things in the Republican Party, and I guess the country, says he wants a shutdown. It's not going to hurt him. There's hundreds of billions of dollars. He's already declaring victory on Twitter, posting, "Your elected representatives have heard you." Oh, yeah, us. And now the terrible bill is dead, says the billionaire. The voice of the people, meaning me, has triumphed. Melanie Zanona is a senior congressional reporter for Punchbowl News, contributor to NBC News. She joins me now from Capitol Hill. Melanie, we have spoken many times amidst Capitol Hill chaos on this very program. You have covered a lot. This is a new one, I think.
Yeah, I am getting a little bit of deja vu from when I covered the Capitol back in Trump's first term. But now we have Elon Musk in the mix, which has really just sort of amplified the chaos. And I think it's important to point out here, we were joking about how much Republicans really are looking to Elon Musk for their cues, but they view him really as the most powerful proxy. They think he speaks for Trump. And so when he was tweeting that today, members were taking notice. That tweet was flying around. I saw people on their phones on their way to votes looking at that tweet. One of them pulled it out and showed me. And that mattered. I mean, Musk has Trump's ear. Musk spent hundreds of millions of dollars in the last election. He was talking about threatening to primary or have these members ousted if they didn't do what Musk was calling for, which was vote against this large CR, this large spending bill. And then Trump, really just threw an extra grenade into the mix when he said, not only do I not like the CR that Mike Johnson was going to put forward, but now I want you guys to consider a debt ceiling increase, which, just to be clear, no one was talking about this. The deadline is not expected to happen for another 6 months. I will say, Chris, that me and my colleagues at Punchbowl News had been hearing that Trump had been privately complaining about the debt ceiling and not wanting to have to do it on his watch for a while now. But at no point, at any point in these negotiations, were they talking about the debt ceiling? And that is an extremely complicated issue to try to throw in the 11th hour. So that's where we're at right now. We're days away from a government shutdown. Trump and Elon Musk tanked the plan that Johnson had cut with Democrats. And right now, it's just very unclear how they are going to get out of this jam. It's really, we've been calling it the nightmare before Christmas, because truly it is just a mess for Johnson and Republicans right now.
Here's the Democratic leader, Hakeem Jeffries, came out to talk to the press, and he had this to say today. Take a listen.
House Republicans have now unilaterally decided to break a bipartisan agreement that they made. House Republicans have been ordered to shut down the government and hurt everyday Americans all across this country. House Republicans will now own any harm that is visited upon the American people that results from a government shutdown or worse.
Now, there's always an asymmetry with these shutdown fights, because I think on a sort of substantive level, Democrats don't want to shut the government down, and Republicans tend to be like, what's it? Well, who cares? So there's always this kind of imbalance, right? Like, Democrats genuinely, not for political reasons, like just out of like what they believe, don't want to shut the government down. Taking that aside, and the people who could get hurt, which we'll talk about in a second, politically, there's no reason for Schumer or Jeffries to help Johnson out of this jam, right?
Exactly. Let me walk you through what the Democratic thinking is right now. They did this huge bipartisan deal with Speaker Johnson. He reneged on that deal. So their thinking is, if you're going to put up a plan B, maybe a clean CR, maybe this clean CR with the debt ceiling, although I'm very skeptical of that as well, you can do that, but you're going to have to do it with your own Republican votes. We're not going to bail you out. You walked away from that deal. Why would we help you when, after weeks and weeks of these tough negotiations and celebrating all these wins that we had, if you're going to pull the rug out from underneath us, we have no incentive to help you. And on the debt ceiling point, they don't even have to address the debt ceiling for at least another 6 months here. So there's very little incentive for Democrats to bail them out, especially when it was Trump and Elon Musk who were responsible for this thing going up in flames. And if the government were to shut down, Republicans are in control in the House. The Democrats are still in control in the Senate. But I think their belief right now is that Republicans would get a lot of the blame for a government shutdown. And they're also going to frame it rightly so. So this is a preview of what's to come in Trump's Washington.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things I've learned from this is that, like, no one remembers this stuff in 3 weeks or a month or 5 months. So, like, the long-term political consequences, I think, are minimal. Although I do think the Elon Musk idea, Musk is calling for this, just shut it down until Trump is sworn in. A month of, like, Coast Guard folks not getting checks and real serious things happening. That would really, I think, be a disastrous situation to inherit as Donald Trump, with like a one-vote majority in the House and having to pass a CR right away.
Right. I mean, here's the thing. Musk is a billionaire, first of all, and he is not an elected politician. He does not have an understanding of how Congress works. I get what Trump and his allies are saying about trying to, we need disruptors and people who think differently because they believe it hasn't worked the way, normal politicians have tried to run government. But that being said, this is what happens when you elevate someone like Musk to a position. Yeah. Johnson it's his own fault here. He elevated Musk, and now Musk is stabbing him in the back by threatening to take down this bill, threatening his members. So that's the situation we find ourselves in now. And again, this is just going to be a taste of what's to come over these next few years here.
surprising reversal from the House Ethics Committee, which will give the public a chance to see the report of their years-long investigation into former Republican congressman and failed Attorney General nominee Matt Gaetz. Two sources familiar with the matter told NBC News that the Ethics Committee voted earlier this month to release the report. The committee was previously deadlocked across party lines to release the report, with House Speaker Mike Johnson lobbying the committee to kill the report. The committee's findings will be made public as early as this week and will conclude their investigation into allegations against Gaetz, which include whether he engaged in sexual misconduct and illicit drug use, accepted improper gifts, gave special favors to people with whom he had personal relationships, and obstructed the House probe. Joining our conversation, NBC News Capitol Hill correspondent Ali Vitale. Mark and Michael are still with us. All right, Ali, how did this all happen, and what are you hearing about the reversal?
Well, look, we know the Ethics Committee meets regularly, and we also knew that they left in early December deadlocked on what they were going to do with the Matt Gaetz referral. So the fact that they came back to this and held yet another vote where they ultimately came out with a decision is not entirely shocking. The fact that we know in advance that they're releasing the report is what's surprising about this, because this is typically a committee, and many of your guests know this, that is shrouded in secrecy. They all promise in bipartisan fashion not to leak or talk about what happens in the room. And so the fact that a few weeks ago we were not just knowing when they were going to be meeting and what the topic of their meeting was, but the fact that we knew from the chairman himself that he was deadlocked on this issue of what to do about the Gaetz investigation and report that they had drafted, that's notable. He also, the chairman, included many details about the fact that, well, maybe the report wasn't done at that point. Maybe that's why they had to double back. And then we saw the Democratic ranking member, Susan Wild of Pennsylvania, come out and say that she wanted to make clear that deadlocked did not mean an agreement in the room to not release this report. That was really interesting. It gives us insight into the way that members were thinking about their role on the Ethics Committee, but it's also what we never get from the Ethics Committee. So there's a lot that's very spoiling to those of us who want transparency in the process. They want to know what's going on in these committee rooms. And it's also something that sort of speaks to the way that happenings in the Trump era tend to fray traditional bipartisan agreements, even around committees like these, that typically don't operate in this fashion, but now are because of the stakes and because of the landscape. So now we know we're going to be getting the report at some time by the end of this Congress. I do think, and I know we'll talk about this, that the government funding craziness that has unfolded in the last 2 hours is probably going to impact the timing of when this report comes out, because it seems like the Ethics Committee folks would like to release the report, but they'd like to do it as members are getting out of town. That makes sense for a lot of political reasons, but that timing could shift if Congress finds itself in a shutdown posture and thusly on an extended schedule for how long they're staying in Washington.
So, Mark Elias, we'll talk about that CR in just a minute, as Ali so astutely assumed. But I want to talk with you as someone who really has an eye on accountability and has sought accountability through legal routes. What you think, what you make of the House Ethics Committee choosing to release this report publicly?
Look, to me, this is not that complicated. Matt Gaetz is what he is, and the Republicans in the House were just as happy as the Democrats originally to release the report, because they didn't want to have to answer for him or stand up behind him. Then what happened is Donald Trump appointed him to be the Attorney General, and all of a sudden the Republicans all fell into line. And the Republicans in the House were going to protect Matt Gaetz at all costs, because that's what Donald Trump wanted them to do. Then Matt Gaetz dropped out, and they reverted back to, okay, let's release the report, except with the caveat, we don't want to embarrass our members by having them to answer questions about this report. You know, as Ali said, for understandable political reasons. Let's be clear. The Democrats, they don't have any political reasons to not want to talk about the Gaetz report. The people who are worried that this will be released while they're still around are the Republicans, who are going to have to explain why it is they were willing to protect this guy for so long and wanted to originally stymie this report. And the only reason they were wanting to do that is because they're sycophants and protectors of Donald Trump. I just want to add just 15 seconds of personal privilege, to the last segment. The real heroes of the story are the Michael Steeles. It's easy for a Democratic lawyer to say, that what is going on right now is wrong. It is hard for the former RNC chair to do that. And he is one of the heroes of this story. And so I just wanted to take a moment to recognize that.
Michael Steele, unlike yours truly, knows how to take a compliment. So I will ping it over to him, because while I agree with Mark's assessment that this whole thing is not complicated, I bet if you were Speaker Mike Johnson, who pushed hard to keep this report from coming out, Michael, then you disagree because this is complicated for him.
It's not complicated for the speaker. It's whatever Donald Trump told him to do. And this is you're not talking about John Boehner. You're not talking about even Newt Gingrich here. You're talking about the current speaker, who has shown his proclivities towards insurrection as one of the architects of that effort in 2021. And since then, just aligning the House with whatever Donald Trump wants. What this whole thing tells me is a secret ballot, matters in Washington. If there had been a secret ballot in impeachment 1 or impeachment 2, Donald Trump would have been long. His ass would have been out of town a long time ago. We would not be here right now with this. But because of the way the rules are set up, and because those members who know what the results of a secret ballot would be, they fought against those efforts during the impeachment. They could have very easily had that impeachment vote as a secret ballot. In this committee, this was the safe harbor. This was the space they could all retreat to, and no one would know how the members voted. And guess what? The report is being released, despite the fact that the speaker tried everything in his power to prevent it from being released, which, by the way, is a violation of their rules, because he's not supposed to do that.
All right, Ali Vitale, 1, tell us if any of our analysis is flying in the opposite direction of your deeply sourced reporting. And 2, I want to get back to the CR. You have Trump signaling his opposition to the budget deal. Talk me through what happens now.
Well, for Mike Johnson, with friends like these, I mean, that's always been the story of Republican speakers these last 2-3 years. But certainly for Johnson, I think what you're right about saying in regards to the Ethics Committee, I know it's not complicated from the front of a lot of Republicans dislike Gates, a lot of Democrats dislike Gates. I got the sense that many of them would have been more than fine with this report getting out there. However, it would have gotten out there. So there's a lot of happy people in bipartisan fashion on the House side of this building who want to see this Gates report out there. You guys are absolutely right about that. I also think the piece for Johnson is he's now watching a committee that is notoriously independent and tries not to be influenced by leadership actively show that they are willing to say, I see that the speaker said he doesn't want this report released about Gates because he's a former member. We're just not going to listen to that. I think that's an important thing that might give some indications about the profile that Johnson cuts within this Republican conference. And then that translates to the way that the government funding battle is unfolding. And in the last hour and a half, it really does feel like there is just shell shock here on Capitol Hill because of the way that not just conservatives, who we always expected to be upset about the plan that Johnson put together, because it's not just a continuing resolution that funds the government till March, it includes disaster relief, but it also includes a whole bunch of other stuff. And the more stuff that they put on this, the more angry conservative members got, both on the House and Senate side. These people were always the same people that were never going to vote for this continuing resolution, but this has always meant problems for Johnson, especially because a few weeks from now, when everyone comes back from the new year and from the holidays, he's got to try to get reelected speaker with even thinner margins than he had this last time around. So those margins are coming into play, but the president-elect also came in from over the top and basically dunked on his top guy in the House, saying he didn't like the plan that Johnson put together and complicating the entire process, forcing Republican leadership to start from scratch on Wednesday evening when the government shuts down at midnight on Friday. They're scrabbling together, trying to put together a plan, but there is no firm plan at this point. My text messages right now from Republicans and Democrats are basically just what is going on. They don't have a sense of where this goes next. The most likely plan B is that they end up doing a clean continuing resolution and just pairing it with disaster relief. That's certainly something that's been floated that conservatives would be happy with. But at the same time, again, these are the same conservatives that rarely, if ever, vote for continuing resolutions. So Johnson may not even earn them anyway, but they are the ones that sent him back to the drawing board with the help of the president-elect.
Well, here's a couple of things that Donald Trump and his apparent boss, Elon Musk, do not understand. One, the president of the United States, Joe Biden, is a Democrat. Two, the United States Senate is controlled by Democrats and Democratic Majority Leader Chuck Schumer. Anyone who understands that knows why the budget extension bill negotiated by the Republican Speaker of the Republican House includes compromises with Democrats and Chuck Schumer. Elon Musk objected to those compromises in the bill, saying that any Republican who votes for it should be voted out of office. That's how he began his day. And only hours after that, after Elon Musk led the way, only then did Donald Trump catch up with his apparent boss, Elon Musk, and join in objecting to the bill. Republican Speaker Mike Johnson was with Donald Trump and Elon Musk while he was negotiating the bill. He was with them constantly while he was negotiating that bill. Mike Johnson has stayed as close to them as possible to try to make sure that what happened today would not happen. But you cannot stop chaos in the Republican Party. And would not have happened if Donald Trump were a rational person, but he's not. And so Donald Trump decided at the very last minute, after weeks of negotiation, to tell Mike Johnson and the Republicans what he wants in the bill, something he never said before today. Donald Trump has had every day since Election Day to tell them what he wanted in this bill, which is necessary to keep the government operating beyond this weekend. And Donald Trump has not said a word about it until today. The last time we had a government shutdown was because Donald Trump changed his mind just like this at the very last minute and demanded the impossible. Donald Trump defied a bipartisan agreement at the last minute while he was president, and that's how he got the government shutdown of December 2018, and the longest shutdowns the government's ever had. That was Donald Trump's record-setting shutdown. If the government goes into shutdown again, as it could this weekend, it will once again be Donald Trump's shutdown, this time with a major assist from his apparent boss, Elon Musk. So perhaps it could best be described as the Musk-Trump shutdown, especially when Elon Musk demonstrated his total ignorance of how government works today by saying no bills should be passed Congress until January 20th, when Donald Trump takes office. None, zero. Funding for the government runs out this weekend. So Elon Musk, in that statement, is advocating for a complete government shutdown until the afternoon of January 20th, at least. But Donald Trump disagrees with Elon Musk about that, completely disagrees. Donald Trump actually wants Congress to pass a bill and pass it right away. And he finally told Republicans what he wants at 4:28 p.m. today, after Republicans had been working on this bill for weeks. Donald Trump wants Republicans to pass a bill to continue to fund the government, and Donald Trump now insists that Republicans pass a bill increasing the debt limit of the federal government. Also, Donald Trump knows that he intends to wildly increase the debt of the federal government with massive tax cuts to billionaires like Elon Musk. But Donald Trump wants Democrats and Joe Biden to increase the debt ceiling for him right now so that he can pass his tax cuts next year. Everyone in politics in Washington understands the debt ceiling game, but only Donald Trump is tactically stupid enough to say out loud, as he did today in writing, when he said this: increasing the debt ceiling is not great, but we'd rather do it on Biden's watch. That's it. That's his whole thing. He'd rather do it on Biden's watch. He needs to do it, but he doesn't want to do it. Let Joe Biden do it. Each party would, of course, rather the debt ceiling be raised by the other party, but they usually don't get to pick when the debt ceiling needs to be raised. In fact, the debt ceiling won't really need to be raised until June at the earliest. But Donald Trump actually wants the Democrats of the United States Senate to vote for a continuing spending bill that includes a debt ceiling increase. And then, after that bill passes the House, Donald Trump wants Joe Biden to sign that debt ceiling increase into law for Donald Trump so that Donald Trump can cut the taxes of billionaires like Elon Musk. In other words, Donald Trump is asking for the impossible. That's not going to happen. Asking for the impossible is something he's done before with Congress, and he has always lost when he's asked for the impossible, always. Yes, he can get tax cuts through the Republican Congress because that's easy, but he's never gotten anything difficult. Never once through Congress. Donald Trump added this line about the debt ceiling. If Democrats won't cooperate on the debt ceiling now, what makes anyone think they would do it in June during our administration? Now, why would you need Democrats to vote for anything during the Trump administration? Republicans are going to control the House of Representatives. Republicans are going to control the Senate by very tiny margins. And Donald Trump knows that he will not be able to get every Republican in the House and every Republican in the Senate to vote for a debt ceiling increase next year, even though Donald Trump knows he needs one. And so he actually now publicly calls on Democrats to do it for him today. Raising the debt ceiling beyond the end of Joe Biden's administration is one of the brilliant tactical accomplishments of President Biden as a negotiator with Congress. A Republican House of Representatives agreed to do that for Joe Biden. We reported on that negotiation in detail on this program. It was one of the stunning negotiating triumphs of President Biden and his budget staff that was not well understood at the time, but Donald Trump really understands it tonight for the first time. Donald Trump understands that Joe Biden brilliantly extended the debt ceiling beyond the end of his own term in the presidency in such a way that Donald Trump will not be able to cut taxes for billionaires next year without a debt ceiling increase. Donald Trump's sudden panic today about the debt ceiling is because Donald Trump only realized today how brilliantly Joe Biden boxed him in on the debt ceiling. And now Donald Trump is begging Joe Biden to let him out of the box Joe Biden created. Poor little Mike Johnson thought that the crazy people around him were okay with what he was negotiating.
I was communicating with Elon last night. Elon and Vivek and I are on a text chain together, and I was explaining to them the background of this. And Vivek and I talked last night about almost midnight, and he said, look, I get it. He said, we understand you're in an impossible position. Everybody knows that. Remember, guys, we still have just a razor-thin margin of Republicans, so any bill has to have Democrat votes. They understand the situation. They said, it's not directed to you, Mr. Speaker, but we don't like the spending. I said, guess what, fellas? I don't either.
After Donald Trump desperately, in effect, today, publicly begged Joe Biden and the Senate's Democratic Majority Leader Chuck Schumer and the House Democratic Leader Hakeem Jeffries to let him out of the debt ceiling box by creating an entire new bill to replace the bipartisan bill that Chuck Schumer and Hakeem Jeffries negotiated with Mike Johnson. Congressman Jeffries said this.
Good evening, everyone. House Republicans, House Democrats, Senate Republicans, and Senate Democrats reached a bipartisan agreement to fund the government, keep it open, and meet the needs of the American people. We reached a bipartisan agreement to provide disaster assistance to everyday Americans whose lives have been upended and turned upside down as a result of hurricanes, tornadoes, wildfires, floods, and other types of extreme weather events. We reached a bipartisan agreement to meet the needs of the American people and provide assistance to farmers, families, children, seniors, veterans, men and women in uniform, and working class Americans. House Republicans have now unilaterally decided to break a bipartisan agreement that they made. House Republicans have been ordered to shut down the government and hurt everyday Americans all across this country. House Republicans will now own any harm that is visited upon the American people that results from a government shutdown or worse. An agreement is an agreement. It was bipartisan, and there is nothing more to say.
An agreement is an agreement until Elon Musk and Donald Trump decide to get involved. Before the explosion of the Musk-Trump volcano in the House of Representatives today, the big news of the day in the House was that the House Ethics Committee voted to release the committee's report on its investigation of former Congressman Matt Gaetz and allegations that included him paying young women and girls under the age of consent for sex. The committee report is expected to be released only after the House of Representatives finishes voting on a budget agreement.
Donald Trump campaigned on retribution, and his allies are helping him make good on that promise. In a new report, House Republicans say Liz Cheney should be investigated over her work on the January 6th committee. In a statement on Blue Sky, Cheney said the report, quote, intentionally disregards the truth and fabricates lies in an attempt to cover up what Donald Trump did. And fresh off his settlement victory over ABC, the president-elect is now suing the Des Moines Register for running a poll that he didn't actually like. Well, Senator Chris Murphy warned today that the legal attacks that we are now seeing are all part of Donald Trump's plan to, quote, cripple our democracy. Watch what he said.
In countries where that happens, where the opposition fears going to jail, so they stay home, and the press doesn't tell the truth because they fear consequences, democracy dies. And Trump, over the last 4 days, is showing you that plan to suppress the opposition and to suppress the press. And so far, he has had stunning success even before he gets sworn in.
I want to welcome Representative Jamie Raskin of Maryland. As of today, he's also the new top Democrat on the House Judiciary Committee. I don't know, you won this big thing that is a great big headache in the next 4 years. So I want to start, I'm so glad you're with us, and get your reaction to this warning from Senator Chris Murphy. Do you share his fears?
Well, of course, he's right that what we see is the formation of a new billionaire oligarchical class which wants to participate in government with a putative monarch and run roughshod over all the laws and the Constitution. But we've got a resilient Constitution in America that will protect both the press and political opposition, I believe. You know, they're going after Liz Cheney, talking about the fact that she spoke with one of our witnesses, Cassidy Hutchinson. Yes, that's what legislative investigators do. We talk to witnesses and we bring them forth and they testify under oath, as Cassidy Hutchinson did. And nobody has accused her, much less proven that she's told any lies. So how exactly did Liz Cheney in any way suborn perjury or coach false testimony? It's ridiculous. And that's as a matter of fact. As a matter of law, of course, everything we did in our legislative capacity, serving in an investigative committee, the January 6th Select Committee, was protected by the Speech and Debate Clause, which says that when we act as legislators, either legislating or researching or investigating, we are protected from attack by another branch of the government, by the executive branch. So I think that we've got a resilient constitutional structure. Obviously, it's being put under stress, and these guys do model themselves after Putin in Russia and Orban in Hungary and Kim Jong-un and all the other autocrats and kleptocrats of the world. But we're going to model ourselves after prior generations of American patriots who stood up for the Constitution and the Bill of Rights.
So if you're not worried for Liz Cheney, you know the truth, you worked with her, she'll be fine. What about this threat? Right, for others going forward, if they look and say, man, look what Liz Cheney is going through. I don't want to stand up to Donald Trump. I don't want to get in the way of this and potentially be his next target. Are you worried about what's to come in the future?
Yeah, I didn't say I wasn't worried, Stephanie. I said I'm worried, but we are taking the precautions we've got based on our constitutional system. And that's true not just for Liz Cheney and other legislative and prosecutorial investigators, but it's also true for the freedom of the press. When, Donald Trump says he's going to go after any newspaper or TV station that has said something he doesn't like, that's not the constitutional standard. The constitutional standard is New York Times versus Sullivan. Did someone deliberately tell a defamatory lie about you, a lie that either they understood not to be true or where they were deliberately reckless with respect to its veracity? That's a very tough standard. And that's why, ABC News and other media entities should not just be giving in to Donald Trump's army of lawyers that go after people. We've got to hang tough for the Constitution.
Why do you think they went after Liz Cheney? Because Adam Kinzinger was also on that committee. A number of Republicans also spoke out, testified, spoke out against Donald Trump. Why do you think Liz Cheney is the target?
Oh, they want to make an example out of her. Liz Cheney was the third most powerful Republican in the House Republican caucus. She was the chair of the Republican conference. She was a critical figure, the highest ranking woman in the Republican caucus in the House of Representatives, and she stood by the Constitution. She was a constitutional patriot. So they have to make an example out of her in order to implant fear in other people. They're trying to intimidate others, just the way they're trying to intimidate people today when Elon Musk says that he's going to fund the challengers of anybody who dares to vote for the budget agreement that the Republicans actually made with us in the House and the Senate. And so it's like Elon Musk has become the fourth branch of government, and then Donald Trump, I guess, trailing behind. He's like the fifth branch of government. But it's the oligarchs and the monarchs who are trying to dictate to the people who actually participate in the representative democratic system.
What do you think about that? Just today, Mike Johnson says he was texting with Elon Musk. What's your take on that?
Well, of course, he's got a right to text text anybody he wants to text with.
But as it relates to the spending bill, sorry, not just how are rockets doing today regarding the spending bill. Apologies.
Right. But that's what I mean. The governmental process had been working. There was real bipartisan compromise in action. We had come up with an agreement to keep the government of the United States going so people can get their VA benefits and their Social Security checks. And so the government can be doing all of the things that it does with the highways and the national parks and the museums and so on. And then one guy who happens to be the wealthiest person in the world, decides he's very willing to shut down the U.S. government if he doesn't get his way, after the whole legislative process has been taking place successfully for the last 5 or 6 or 7 weeks. And both parties gave, and there was a compromise. And yet this new branch of government erupts. And then nobody knew where Donald Trump was until he said, well, yeah, go ahead and renegotiate it. And, I would like to see some changes to what is it he decided he wanted to do here? Lift the credit limit, I think, is what he wanted to do. He said he didn't want to do it under the Trump administration. He wants to do it under the Biden administration. He wanted to accomplish that, so that would be blamed on the Democrats. I mean, this is just pure chaos. And I got to tell you that a lot of us in Congress looking at it, living through it, are coming to the conclusion that chaos is not some incidental byproduct of some coherent political agenda they have. Chaos is the point. Chaos is the whole objective here. And that does feel like authoritarianism, when they want to destroy democratic institutions and democratic processes and replace it with chaos. There are a lot of people who are going to be hurt by this.
It was that Steve Bannon interview, what was it, 7 years ago, when he said we want to blow the whole thing up and burn it down. Philip, I think you had a question.
Yeah, Congressman Philip Bump from the Washington Post. Your old sparring sparring partner on House Oversight, James Comer, had an interview today. He obviously is one of the central people pushing for the impeachment of Joe Biden based on what Hunter Biden had done. And he said this, he was asked if he was going to hold the same standard for President Trump. He said this: as long as President Trump is transparent, I think the American people will give him a pass on his business activity. But if it ever comes out he's got secret deals or whatever, then that could potentially be a problem, obviously, with the deal. I was curious what your thoughts on that were.
Well, if you take the Foreign Emoluments Clause, Phil, for example, it says that nobody in federal government, including the president, shall accept a present, an emolument, which means a payment, an office or a title of any kind, whatever, from a foreign state king or prince. And yet we know that Donald Trump, when he was in office, accepted at least $8 million from the Chinese government, from the Royal Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia, from the United Arab Emirates, from Indonesia, and so on. Whether he does that publicly or privately, it doesn't make any difference. It's against the Constitution. He can't do that. And it looks like it's going to be even worse this time. Now he feels completely unrestrained and uninhibited and unaccountable. And he's just going to stay in business, and he'll be collecting perhaps not millions or hundreds of millions, but billions of dollars, the way that his son-in-law Jared Kushner did when he brought back a cool $2 billion from Saudi Arabia right after the first Trump administration ended. So it's not the case that just because you rob a bank in broad daylight, it's illegal to rob a bank. You can't do it secretly. You can't embezzle secretly, but you can't rob it in broad daylight either. So it's not a question of secrecy. The White House cannot be a money-making operation for the president and his family.
It is time to play what we here at The ReidOut like to call Truth or Troll. As our once and future president continues playing games with America's foreign policy, leaving us here in the media to discern what it is he really means. The latest instance features Trump's new favorite target, Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, who had tried to buddy up to Trump by making the now customary pilgrimage to Mar-a-Lago to kneel before the golden toilets, only to wake up to Trump calling him the governor of the great state of Canada. Earlier today, Trump again wrote that many Canadians want Canada to become the 51st U.S. state, and that he thinks it's a great idea. Joke or not, truth or troll, Trump's statements as incoming president have resonance. It is in part why his tariff threat helped to precipitate a leadership crisis in Canada, which now joins France and Germany as the third major economy to plunge into political turmoil weeks before the presidential transition. So what does Trump really mean when he says he wants Canada as the 51st state? Is it a truth or a troll? And what's the impact, regardless of the intent? Joining me now is Katie Simpson, senior foreign correspondent with CBC News in Canada. It is so great to meet you, Katie. What on the Canadian side of the border, what do folks think that Trump means when he says 51st state?
Well, it's widely seen as an insult, but at the same time, Canada is sort of used to this kind of rhetoric from Donald Trump. And sort of what we're seeing in Ottawa, from the political side at least, is this urge not to overreact. Right now, the Canada-U.S. relationship is in a very difficult position, really an explosive position when you look at it, because there is that tariff threat. If Donald Trump makes good on that tariff threat, it will significantly harm the Canadian economy, likely cause thousands of jobs. Trade is the most important aspect of the Canadian economy, trade with the United States. And so if that comes to fruition, if that happens, it would be devastating for the Canadian economy. So the strategy coming from Ottawa right now, a government that is in a lot of turmoil of its own, is try to remain united, present a united front to Donald Trump, sort of try to ignore any sort of this trolling tactics and just really focus on the prize, which for Canada in this moment is avoiding those tariffs.
Is it seen as an extortion attempt to try to threaten the 25% tariffs to get something from Canada in exchange for not doing them?
What we understand from our sources is that after the Canadian delegation left the Mar-a-Lago dinner, it's that Donald Trump really wants to rack up some wins that he can point to before he even comes into office. And so Canada is trying to hit that goal. And there was a little bit of a development on that today. Trump's team put out a press release citing, Canada just announced that it's going to spend $1.3 billion to improve border security along the northern border. And they're pointing to that as a win. Now, some of Donald Trump's complaints about the Canadian border, they are absolutely not based in fact, or they're completely hyperbolic. So when he talks about fentanyl pouring in from the northern northern border. That's not the case. This year alone, it's something close to 50 pounds of fentanyl has crossed from Canada into the United States. Compare that to 21,000 pounds coming in from the southern border. The thing is, Canada does have some challenges when it comes to money laundering and not having strong enough laws to go after organized crime. That's something that the Canadian government is looking at, needs to do anyway. So they're trying to find win-win areas where they can cooperate with Trump because they are absolutely terrified of those 25% tariffs.
And the bottom line is that if you tank the economy of Canada, what you're going to get is actually more migration from Canada of people then coming into the United States. That's what happens when economies fall, right?
Well, the concern is that I don't think Canada knows what they would do, because it would be a crisis that is sort of the only thing is comparable is when Donald Trump first was elected and was threatening to rip up NAFTA.
Yeah.
That caused such a crisis. All the smartest people in Ottawa were put on trying to prevent that from happening. Canada's now doing that again. This is just the 2.0 version.
Because all he did was update NAFTA. He didn't get rid of it at all. Let's talk about the threat the other way, because there was one leader in Canada who threatened to shut off the power. I don't think Americans understand that we buy a lot of our power from Canada in places like Michigan. What about that threat?
So that is from Ontario Premier Doug Ford. He's sort of been a leading voice for all the premiers in Canada. Compare that to a state governor, talking about how Canada should retaliate should Trump make good on the threats. He's got a lot at stake in this because the Ontario auto sector employs thousands of people. It is a huge economic generator, and it would be particularly devastating in this province. It's the largest province in Canada. Doug Ford, any Canadians who may be watching this right now, Doug Ford has sort of this long history, very interesting path to his role in government right now, but he's sort of seen as a leading, strong voice on this, which anyone who's followed his career, he was a city councillor in Toronto. He was famously brother to the former crack-smoking mayor in Toronto, Rob Ford. Yeah. And so his path, he's now a two-term premier in the province of Ontario. And so he has come out to sort of be a leading voice on this issue to say, listen, we need to hit back. I think perhaps the threat is being maybe walked back just a little bit, and some of the premiers don't agree with that strategy.
And they'd be hitting blue
this.
states.
Well, the concern is that it would just, if the tariffs hit, it would be just such a devastating thing.
Does Justin Trudeau survive this? And if not, who would be the person likely to replace him?
The political turmoil in Canada right now is unlike anything Justin Trudeau's ever had to deal with. His finance minister, who was also his deputy prime minister, she quit largely over a dispute on how to, face the tariffs from Donald Trump. That's how significant these threats are. Also, there is some political turmoil there about whether she was going to be shuffled out of one of her positions and be told to announce that Canada is going to miss its deficit targets and then lose her job the next day. There's a lot of sort of backstory to that right now that a lot of Canadian...
Chrystia Freeland, who we know very well. She was a hardball regular back in the day.
Yes, so there's a lot of sort of digging going around on what exactly led to this moment for her to leave. Yeah. But it is a devastating blow. We haven't heard directly from the Prime Minister in terms of what his future path forward is. Imagine, let's put this in American perspective. Imagine Joe Biden and Kamala Harris. And Kamala Harris quits and lists a scathing letter about all the reasons why, accusing him of political gimmicks, and sort of at this moment of just on the eve of an election does this. Imagine what the political ramifications
She might have won
be.
the election. Katie Simpson, thank you very much. Please come back.